Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive.
Hello.
We're jumping straight into some really specific source material today.
Yeah, just one audio recording. It's titled John McCain Exposed by Vietnam Vets and POWs.mp3.
Right. And our focus, just so you know, is tightly on what this particular recording presents.
Exactly. It's a deep dive into the specific criticisms leveled against John McCain in this audio,
Hmm.
mostly voiced by the individuals featured in the recording itself, focusing on his time as a Vietnam POW and, his later actions regarding the POW MIA issue.
So our mission here is pretty simple. We're just going to walk you through this source's viewpoint.
Right.
We'll highlight the core arguments, the details presented in this recording, just to give you a clear picture of what it alleges.
And importantly, we're not adding anything from outside this source.
No, definitely not. And we're not taking sides on the claims themselves.
We're just guiding you through the specific material so you can quickly get a handle on what's actually in it.
Think of us as helping you navigate the landscape of this one audio document.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay. So where does this recording even start?
Well, it opens by referencing a musical parody, Bomb, 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 Bomb. And it notes that McCain apparently defended it as, like, veteran humor.
Right. I think I remember hearing about that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the speaker in the recording mentions McCain suggested people who took it seriously should, quote, get a life.
Okay. And then
Right after that, the audio makes a very strong central assertion. It claims, and this is a direct quote, "What you won't hear on television is how much Vietnam veterans and POWs hate John McCain."
wow. Okay. So that kind of sets the stage.
It definitely sets the tone for the rest of the criticisms laid out in the recording, yeah.
All right. So let's get into the main area of criticism this source focuses on. That's the POW MIA issue, right? And McCain's alleged actions there.
Exactly. The recording claims the Senate felt compelled to set up a select committee
To look into what specifically?
into the possibility that some POWs might have been left behind in Vietnam.
Okay. That makes sense.
But according to this source, actually establishing that committee took like 9 months,
9 months? Why so long?
primarily because of what they describe as bitter opposition from Senator McCain. That's the source's claim.
Bitter opposition. The source finds that strange.
Yeah, the speaker in the recording calls it remarkable, especially given that McCain himself was a POW.
And a key point emphasized in the audio is the claim about acknowledging POWs.
Yes, the source states, in no instance would he ever give in and say there were POWs left behind.
Never.
Never, according to this recording. And the speaker directly questions how he could be so sure about that.
Does the source offer any potential reasons why he'd be so sure?
It speculates a bit. It mentions maybe a guilt complex or perhaps a promise made to the Vietnamese.
Interesting.
The speaker even suggests that maybe McCain genuinely believed no one was left behind, but calls that possibility the saddest of all.
Okay, now this next part sounds pretty serious about the information side of things.
Yeah, this is where the source alleges that McCain probably did more harm to the idea of trying to get the truth out than any other single person.
More harm than anyone else. That's a huge claim. How?
The way the source claims he did this was by working to block the release of classified intelligence dealing with the PMIA problem.
Blocking classified intel.
That's the allegation. So the material presents this picture of a deliberate effort to make access to information harder.
So the speaker in the recording says McCain actively made it harder to get documents.
Yes, they assert that McCain stepped in and, in effect, made it harder to get documentation, which they say, quote, certainly hurt us.
Or their efforts to find information.
Right. They had apparently hoped for a massive release of documentation, but the source claims many documents were held back for no reason.
Held back without reason. And what was the goal of getting these documents out, according to the source?
Well, the stated goal, as described in the audio, was pretty straightforward. To just dump this stuff to declassify it literally to the public.
Just release everything.
Pretty much. However, the source insists that information was actively withheld, even from the committee itself.
Even from the official committee.
Yeah, the speaker states, the U.S. government held all kinds of information from the committee, withheld information from the committee. I know that for a fact. That's a direct quote from the source audio.
Okay, so if that's the what about the why? Does the recording offer a motive for why McCain would allegedly do this?
It does, and it's quite a powerful alleged motive presented in this source. It claims he didn't want nobody to check his background.
His background. Meaning what?
His background in the camp. Because, and again, this is the source speaking, a lot of POWs that were with him in the camp said he was a collaborator of the enemy.
Whoa. Collaborator. That's a
Hey,
very serious accusation.
It's a central claim made in this audio, yes, that the alleged effort to block documentation was directly tied to preventing scrutiny of his past in the camp.
So the idea is keep the record sealed to protect his reputation.
That's the connection the source makes. It states information about his time there is still classified so nobody could see it, and alleges, quote, they just had it classified forever so nobody will ever look at it.
And the recording mentions something specific, a McCain regulation.
Yeah, it does. It claims this regulation prevented even former POWs from seeing their own debriefings.
Their own debriefings. Just to clarify for you, the listener, a debriefing is basically the official interview and record made when a soldier returns from captivity, right? Contains experiences, intelligence gathered.
Exactly. Critical records. And the source says this alleged regulation blocked access even to those.
Okay, let's shift to legislation. The source talks about a specific bill.
Right, a bill that the speaker in the audio supported. They mentioned Bob Dornan had a hand in drafting it.
And what was this bill supposed to do?
It was designed to hold government bureaucrats accountable, like legally accountable, potentially with penalties.
Accountable for what?
For lying or withholding information specifically about MIAs, missing in action personnel.
Okay, so trying to force transparency on the MIA issue.
That seems to be the goal described. And according to the source, this bill had significant support initially.
How much support?
It apparently passed the House side unanimously. 41-0. Wide sponsorship.
Unanimous in the House.
Oh.
Okay. But then
Then it went to the Senate, and the speaker in the recording claims that on the Senate side, we had one person standing in the way
let me guess.
of getting in positions that would have been very tough on government bureaucrats who didn't tell the truth. And that person, they allege, was Senator John McCain.
So the source is claiming McCain single-handedly stopped this accountability bill in the Senate.
That's the assertion. And the recording interprets this alleged action by saying McCain fought tooth and nail to protect those bureaucrats.
Why? Why protect them, according to the source?
Because the source claims they were protecting him, it connects back to the earlier point about his background.
The speaker asked a question about this, right?
Yeah, sort of rhetorically. Why wouldn't someone want to prosecute a person who deliberately withholds information that could potentially solve an MIA case? That's the question posed in the audio.
Okay. The source also had comments on the committee structure itself.
Uh-huh. It claims McCain insisted that if a committee was formed, he had to be the chairman.
And the source interprets that insistence how?
Alleging his intent was clear: to kill everything. Basically, to control and stifle the investigation from the inside.
And there were stories about committee members.
Yeah, the speaker recounts instances where committee members allegedly just walked out when evidence started emerging.
Walked out.
Suggesting, according to the source, that they weren't actually interested in getting information, but maybe more in discrediting it.
The recording also briefly mentions John Kerry.
It does. It just sort of groups McCain and Kerry together, stating neither approached the issue in the way the source felt was necessary.
And there was another separate claim about Kerry.
Yeah, a distinct claim mentioned in the source about Kerry's family supposedly receiving sole rights for real estate negotiation in Vietnam.
Okay. And the source ties that timing.
Ties it, calls it a coincidence related to Kerry running the committee at the time, just mentioning it as it's in the source audio.
Got it. Okay, let's pivot a bit. The source also makes direct allegations about McCain's conduct while he was a POW, right? Based on other POW accounts mentioned in the recording.
Yes, exactly. It draws on what it claims are accounts from other POWs who were there.
And what do these alleged accounts say?
Well, the recording reiterates claims from some unnamed POWs who allegedly called him a lying skunk.
Strong words.
And insisted he never was tortured. The source does describe his capture, mentioning he broke both legs and an arm during the ejection.
Okay, broken bones. But then comes another claim that seems contradictory.
Yeah, this is notable. The audio claims that upon capture, he immediately started spilling his guts about everything.
Immediately started talking. Why?
Because, the source alleges, he wanted to avoid being tortured.
But wait, didn't the source just mention claims he wasn't tortured?
Exactly. And the source itself kind of flags this. It highlights a conflict within the different accounts presented in this recording itself.
Interesting. Okay. What else does the source claim he said or did?
It gives a specific number. It alleges McCain made 32 or maybe over 32 different videos, tapes, or interviews.
For whom?
For the Vietnamese, for the communists. Propaganda, essentially, where he supposedly spoke out against America.
Does the source describe the content of these alleged tapes?
It does. It quotes one POW who claimed to hear McCain's actual voice on a tape saying things like, "Our principal targets are schools, orphanages, hospitals, temples, churches."
Wow.
And the speaker in the recording immediately points out that was Jane Fonda's line.
Does the source offer any, nuance here about the pressure of being a POW?
It includes a brief acknowledgement, stating, "Certainly, you do what you need to do to stay alive. Nobody would fault anybody for that.
Okay.
But," the speaker adds, "there comes a point in time where enough is enough."
Right. And then it goes back to the allegations.
It does. It circles back to the claim that McCain himself admits that he gave them all of the codes, all of the data, everything.
Admits it.
That's what the source claims. And it ties this directly back to the torture point again, saying something like, "I'm not blaming him for that because under torture people do that." But the source continues, it turns out he wasn't tortured.
So using the alleged lack of torture.
Exactly. To make the claim of him talking seem more significant, more like collaboration rather than something extracted under duress, the source says he started hanging like a canary in seconds.
Hanging like a canary. And this leads to a nickname.
Yeah, based on this alleged behavior, the source states the Vietnamese communists gave him a nickname, the Songbird.
Songbird.
Or Songbird McCain, specifically. The claim is it was because he just came into the camps singing and telling them everything they wanted to know.
Okay, so very damaging claims about his time as a POW in this recording.
Definitely. And finally, the recording addresses that well-known story about McCain being offered early release.
The Prince story, as the source calls it.
Right. Calls him the prince who could have come home.
The source acknowledges he was offered the chance and turned it down, correct?
It does acknowledge that. Yes, he turned it down. But it really challenges the conventional narrative around why.
How so?
It questions the motive from a very practical, almost careerist standpoint.
Meaning?
The recording argues, look, he was the son of Admiral John McCain II, Jr., a very high-ranking officer.
Right.
If he, a lieutenant senior grade back then, had accepted special treatment and come home early in '67, while hundreds of other Americans stayed captive, sometimes for years longer.
Yeah.
The source argues that would have almost certainly ended his Navy career right there. It would have torpedoed any chance at a future political career. No House seat, no Senate seat. And, maybe just as importantly, it could have seriously damaged his father's prestigious military career.
So the source's perspective is, it wasn't just simple heroism.
The source frames it more complexly. It says, yes, he did make the choice to stay, but it asks you to consider whether he really had a viable alternative if he wanted any kind of future life or political career, and if he wanted to avoid hurting his father's standing.
So, less heroic refusal, more complex calculation based on family status and future ambition, according to the source.
That's the interpretation presented in this specific recording, yes.
Okay, well that seems to cover the main points from this audio.
Yeah, that brings us pretty much to the end of our deep dive into this specific source. We've walked through the main criticisms presented in that recording. John McCain exposed by Vietnam vets in POWs.mp3.
We covered the allegations about actively blocking the search for truth on the MIA issue.
Right, the claims made about his conduct and alleged collaboration while he was a POW.
And the source's specific interpretation of his decision to refuse that early release offer.
And again, it's really crucial for you, the listener, to remember. This exploration focused solely on the claims and perspectives offered within this single piece of source material.
Absolutely. We're not validating or disputing, just reporting what's in this particular audio file.
Exactly.
So, based purely on the themes that came up in this recording, the speaker's assertions about information being withheld or classified.
And the conflicting accounts presented within the source itself, like on the key detail of torture.
Right, and just the general difficulty the source describes in getting access to full documentation. Maybe here's a thought for you to consider.
If, as this source suggests, getting access to the complete historical record on sensitive events can be really challenging.
Yeah.
And if even the accounts we do get can contain internal contradictions, what does that tell us about the complexities? About the potential gaps in how we understand historical narratives generally, regardless of the specific event or the people involved.
Something to think about.
Definitely food for thought about navigating historical information.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.